Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Here is Munir El Azouzi from easymedicaldevice.com. And today we'll try to help your business. I hope we can do that to expand to US or to Europe. We'll see which one is the best for you. But the idea is mainly to help you to understand what are the steps or optimize, if I can say this kind of launch. And for that, I have with me Claire Dyson from DQS. So Claire, welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. It's a privilege and an honor.
Great. Thanks for coming. First, you were already on a previous podcast on the UK. You can maybe give us some UK news later. But first, before that, can you just tell us more about you, maybe for people that don't know you?
Okay, I don't know how far you want me to go back because we could be here quite a while. So my background started off in rational drug design and I moved into medical devices. Spent a long time working with medical devices that interacted with drugs and also drug device delivery systems. And then around 2018, I had this amazing idea to cross the bridge over into the notified body world. And I've actually been there ever since. And I've been involved in several notified bodies, setting up new businesses, getting designation and accreditation. So I was involved in setting up notified bodies in Europe and also setting up notified bodies in the UK. And that gives me quite a good insight into differences and the real mechanics of how a notified body works.
Which
So
is
I
great.
should say I'm currently at DQS.
Exactly.
I got that one.
So, as said, last time you were with us and you discussed about the UK legislation because at that moment, I can't remember, it was 1 year ago, maybe or 2 years ago, talking about the changes that are happening in the UK and maybe how people should be ready for that. As we are talking to expand business, maybe in US, Europe, any news from UK, anything that is happening after Brexit? Because we know that there are a lot of changes that will happen when we don't know, but this will happen.
Well, it's gone quite quiet, as I think most people have noted in the UK. Post-Brexit, it was all this sort of, you've got to change to UKCA. It's got to happen tomorrow. Go, 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 go. And I think it was people were quite mindful that a lot of the deadlines were just not achievable. And so they got pushed back. And then, of course, we're seeing changes, and we're now seeing that CE marking for non-medical devices is going to be accepted indefinitely. Medical devices, we are seeing CE marked for most devices accepted to 2030. There are things that manufacturers have to do. So like updating their quality management system, even if they're placing product on the market with CE. But I think particularly in the last few months, because obviously we've had a political change in the UK and we've got a new government that's come in and we're seeing slightly different way of working. And it's a much more reflective way of working. And I think that there is a keen insight of what is best for the patient, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
We're also seeing from the old government to the new government a real focus on how can we improve innovation and really benefit public health from the innovation that we've got. So looking at preventative medicine, but also looking at getting new technologies on the market. And the UK has set up some really neat pipelines for manufacturers to work with in a three-way partnership with the competent authority MHRA,
Okay.
with a UK approved body, nearly said notified body, but a UK approved body in the
I do
UK,
also the mistake.
and also the manufacturer. But that sort of triangulation from the beginning to accelerate innovative devices into the market, I think is really exciting because it means that we could be seeing products getting onto the UK market much faster. And avoiding some of the red tape. And I know the EU has a similar program, as does the US. I think the difference with the UK program is it's learned from the mistakes of
Exactly.
the other jurisdictions. And so I think it will be very successful in the future.
No, it's great. So yeah, it's what I like from the MHRA. They are really thinking too much or a lot about how to do it good for people and for the industry and everything. So which is always good. So yeah, the UK is updating, if I can say, on the back. Uh, should we push people? I mean, as a consultant, should I push people to go for UKCA or no?
Unearth the pulse of the medtech world with MedTech Conf, a dynamic platform featuring global events on medical devices, biologicals, IVD, and pharmaceuticals. Stay informed, stay ahead, connect, share, and elevate your knowledge. Become an official sponsor. Make your event shine on the map. MedTech Conf, your key to the medtech universe. Remember, the future is now, and it's at your fingertips with MedTech Conf.
It's very difficult for me to say because we provide that service. Honestly, if I were in your position right now, I would be saying think carefully. And it depends on your business model and it depends on what the customer particularly wants. But at the moment, when the UK is accepting devices to be placed on the market under CE, probably not. Where I've seen manufacturers say they actually would like to engage early with UKCA is usually where they've got quite a big portfolio of products and
Yeah,
they're concerned about the future and that transition in the future. And also they want the UK approved body to verify that they've done the QMS updates correctly. So they might push one or two products in their portfolio across into UKCA just to make sure that they're doing their quality management system correctly, they're doing their PMS correctly, and they've not got any potential liabilities that they've not, they've overlooked. But in general, unless the UK is a big part of your market, I would hold back at the moment. However, having seen what's going on in the EU
yeah,
and the fact that manufacturers keep holding back, and that deadline is going to come, and you're then going to be competing for space with every other manufacturer. I would say let's have regular updates. At the moment, just breathe, but
exactly.
keep mindful that 2030 is not that long away.
Exactly, yeah.
It'll
So yeah,
come really fast.
I still find a bit it's not fair. I don't know why, but for UK to say every other products can continue with CE marking, but not medical devices, which is like, why? What's happening there?
Well, I can see why. Because with all of the other CE marking, usually what happens is you have your notified body, approved body assessment. They give you a certificate based on the standards that are there, and as long as your product doesn't change, it stays with them. There's no surveillance. Whereas with a medical
Ah, okay.
device, there's a lot more surveillance. So you've got your annual audits, you have we will have post-market surveillance, you've
Yeah,
got reporting. And so it's a continual process. So it's although they end up with the same mark, the actual pipeline to get that mark is very different. So, and again, if you consider any other product, those standards that they're testing against to get your CE mark will be exactly the same standards that you would test a UKCA.
agree.
If you consider medical devices, MHRA does have different interpretations of what is a medical device. They have different interpretations on medicinal compounds. There's a lot of differences, and I think we also have to remember that the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, has quite a different way of working compared to some member states of the EU. And again, it's making sure that the devices that are coming in meet those requirements.
Agree. So I hope this helps people now to understand more about UK. Um, let's now move to the other part, which is Europe and US also. So as said, the objective is here. We are a company and we want to expand in one other region, and we take Europe and US. So what will be your approach to take, if I can say, for expanding this from Europe to US or US to Europe? So what do you have like some things to say? Oh, start with this, start with that, do this, do that. Do you have some strategy that you can maybe share with the audience and tell them here is mainly how you would have done it?
I would say plan, 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 plan. I
Scenario,
think
scenario, scenario.
exactly. I think we have to bear in mind, just like I know we've talked a little bit about the UK and the EU, there's common specifications. It's the same going to the US. There are some things that these big regulators, they have in common, and they're the same wherever you go. But there are also national differences, and it's the national differences that trip people up. Now, one of the things, if you are considering international markets, you can potentially leverage experience and data from one market to help going into another market. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if you have an approval in one market, it's like a free ticket to go somewhere else. You still have to go through the same approval process. It's just that you can use the data, you can use some of the content of your technical files for the different markets. So I think that every single scenario is different. Every single manufacturer has a different, sorry, go ahead.
No, and what you said is interesting. So mainly, yeah, I have some people that have this misconception to say that, oh, I am already registered in Europe, so my registration in the US will be easier, or I'm already registered in the US, and I can just mention that to the notified body in Europe, and they will accelerate my thing because they don't need to check. It's already checked by FDA, so no need to check, just approve and put a stamp and everything is okay. So this is mainly the misconception that people have also coming from one region or the other.
No, it's every decision is very independent. So there are some things, I'd say those common specifications. If you're doing technical documentation for the US, you can leverage some of the chapters, you can leverage your risk management, you can sort of repackage it for Europe, but it still has to go through a separate approval. The only area where you can get sort of common recognition, and it's not between the US and the EU at the moment, is obviously the MDSAP program.
Yeah, true.
Because the MDSAP program, which is delivered by the recognized organizations, in the US, they will accept that, but they also accept it in Canada and Brazil and Japan and Australia. So, but it's only part of your whole approval process. That's just the audit element. You still have to go through a separate approval for each one of those. But yeah, between the US and the EU, because the EU is just an observer of MDSAP, they don't accept it at the moment. It is a separate application, definitely, but you can combine some of your technical documentation and position it. And going back to what I was saying about planning, that's where the planning really comes in, because you don't really want to have two parallel technical documentation files. You're much better to plan so that you've got just one and identify which jurisdiction, the US or the EU, is going to be best for your device and your particular company, which depends on where you're located. It depends on the type of technology, because the classification can be different.
Yeah.
And obviously in the if you can do a 510K in the US, that's much less data than the EU MDR. But if you can't do a 510K, it's perhaps just as easy to go to the EU.
Yeah, and the classification is one good thing. It's also the fact that there is no match on terms of the classification also between US and Europe. I mean, there are some alignments sometimes, but the way to choose the classification is different also. So I had some customer that says, "Oh, my device is a class 1 in the US, so it should be also a class 1 in Europe." But no, we check in Europe, no, it's a class 2A or 2B, because the way to classify is different, so the way to register is different. I say, "Oh, it's so easy to register in the US," yeah, because it's self-declaration for class 1 when it's notified body for Europe. So there is also this misalignment that people have to understand.
It's actually really confusing, because the US has class 1, class 2, class 3. The EU has class 1, class 2, class 3, although 2 is split to 2A, 2B, and class 1 is split to RSM. So the naming sounds so similar, but actually that's where it stops. Exactly. The actual navigation of the process. Now, the FDA, the US FDA does have low requirements for class 1, but actually in the EU, a manufacturer can self-declare for a class 1 device unless it's reusable, it's got measuring, or it's sterilized, in which case they would need a notified body to do a conformity assessment on those aspects. I think the data says that the US tends to have more class 2 devices.
Yeah.
And obviously, with a class 2 device, you can go through a 510K route. If you have a class 3 device in the US, you can actually approach the US FDA and you can potentially get it reduced to a class 2 if there's a good justification. Obviously, you have to look in on a case-by-case basis of whether that's actually possible. And then all class 3 devices go through the PMA. In the EU, we have rules for classification, and that's written into the EU MDR. And those rules are written in stone. There is no, you can't go to a notified body and say, I follow the rules, it comes out as class 3, but can I have a class 2A? It doesn't work like that. You can raise any differences. You can actually appeal against classification. You can raise it. But the rules are the rules.
Exactly.
So it's not the same as going to the US FDA and getting it reclassified.
As you said, also the US FDA, they have this way to do it, the classification with product codes, which means that they assign a product code to a classification to a product, and they can decide also to say, oh, this product code was class 2 before, now let's move it to class 1 because we see after 20 years there is no risk, the history is low, etc. So they are also reshuffling all those classification for each product. So one day you wake up, it was a class 1, and the other day it was it's becoming a class 2 because there was a big issue on the market, etc. So this is a dynamic classification. But
and I
as
think,
you said, in Europe, it's really strict. It's like here it is, and you cannot change it.
and going back to what you said at the beginning about that misconception that if you've got a US approval, you can then get a fast track into the EU. Well, that's just one reason why you can't, because the classification approach is very, very different. And I think if you've got a US device in the US, you really need to consider when you're going to Europe, is the classification the same? Do I have to do additional parts to my device, technical documentation? Will I have to do additional studies, things like that? So it's not, they're not the same, they're different.
Exactly. And so now we talk mainly about, this way of planning and working and doing. So there is also something that is maybe interesting to hear here is the fact, I mean, we had that in one of the podcasts, is the fact also that you can talk with the FDA before finalizing the submission or whatever. I heard also that, yes, you can, I mean, you are from DEKRA, so maybe you can also talk with notified bodies, but I don't know if it's the same level of talk that you can have there.
Well, it is different. And maybe I can sort of bring in some UK as well, because MHRA has just launched a consultation in the last few weeks offering this pre-sub discussion, just like the US FDA, because now they are a single competent authority over that whole jurisdiction. So, the US pre-sub meetings are really, really helpful. It's where they can really give you feedback and say, this is right, this is wrong, you need this amount of data, and really work with you to get through. Now, going back 10 years ago, notified bodies would do a similar type of discussion. It wasn't in as much detail because obviously they couldn't take responsibility for a manufacturer to say to a manufacturer, you need a clinical study with this amount of data. The manufacturer comes back 10 years later, and of course the benchmarks changed. And because it's not the notified bodies making the rules, it's the competent authority, they don't have that same authority, whereas with the US FDA, they make the rules. So if they say it's going to be X, it's going to be X. And I think with the EU MDR, when it was first started to be implemented, there was this huge wall that went up between notified bodies and manufacturers. And I think that was probably one of the most challenging things to navigate, because we saw manufacturers submitting files with missing so much of what the IVDR, what the MDR actually required. And it put a huge amount of pressure on the notified bodies, because you schedule a 40-hour technical file review and you're not even halfway through after 40 hours because you've raised 100 findings. And then the manufacturer who's invested all this money and time in constructing the EU MDR technical file gets back. I mean, it takes you back to school days where you'd get back an exam from the teacher and it would just all be red pen scored out. And it really changed that dynamic. And it was really quite sad to see that very positive relationship that had been there degrade to this sort of school teacher. And
exactly. I remember that because when I started my career on quality and regulatory affairs, the relationship we had with Notified Body was like, you help us to grow and to improve, and we are discussing, and you are telling me what I'm doing bad, and you are helping me. It's not really consulting, but people may think it's consulting. But at the end, I mean, I meet you just once a year. It's not like I'm meeting you every day for life. Just once a year during an audit, and you tell me this is good, but this is bad. But I will not raise an NC for the month. But I will note that down, and I will see next year if you have changed it, etc. So there was this discussion. If I can say, they were helping us.
It was coaching.
Exactly.
I would have said it was coaching.
Light coaching, but coaching, But here now it's like, no, I don't talk to you. No, I don't see you. No, I don't. As soon as I tell you something, no, I'm afraid. I mean, they are afraid. It's not like I suppose there is some sanctions coming on the back. So I understand that, but this relationship changed, and it's not really.
It was really sad because all the times I was in industry, we had really, really positive relationships with the notified bodies, and I don't think I would even. It wasn't consulting as at all, because they would sometimes say, you're here, you're in a really good place, but on the horizon there's this change coming, be mindful of it. I mean, that nugget of wisdom was really, really helpful. And they would also say, this is best practice. This example that I'm seeing, what you've done is best practice, and I'm going to take home from that. So it did feel a very positive relationship. I think one thing we're now at is I'm seeing more and more notified bodies offer what they're calling structured dialogue. So I've seen this term.
We have discussion with the Chief Sud previously with can't remember what was his name again, Ralph Genzel, from Chief Sud, and he told us about that also, that there's some constructive discussion also about it. Hey, just a second. Do you need a EU, Swiss or UK representative? Then choose Easy Medical Device. We can represent you and also become your importer. Contact us at eo@easymedicaldevice.com.
So within the EU MDR, it does state that the notified body can offer project management, and it does state that an element of that project management has to be incorporated into the certification fees, the annual fees that you're actually charging the manufacturer. But in addition, and I've previously seen it called regulatory pathway as well, or clinical pathway, where a manufacturer can come to a notified body. It's a minuted meeting. It's very, very structured, and the manufacturer can put forward a question, and they can say, for example, this is my regulatory strategy. Is it going to work? And the notified body can say yes or no. They can't say, no, it's not going to work because you need to do X, Y, and Z. That's consultancy. But then for the manufacturer, the value is multiple. I mean, the first big value is if you are a manufacturer, particularly an SME, that's really relying on consultants, and why wouldn't you? Because you don't necessarily have that in-house competence. You can verify that your consultant is on the right track, and that can be really, really helpful. In addition, it can save you a lot of money because you're not doing things that you don't actually need for the approval. And so going back to those innovative devices, those devices where perhaps your whole strategy is based on equivalence, and you go to the notified body and they say,
no, it's not equivalent.
Not a good idea. It means that you've got that opportunity to redress it and your business stays alive. So I think this structured dialogue is a fantastic opportunity. And I know we're going to introduce something quite similar. I'm not sure it'll be called structured dialogue, but I think that to allow manufacturers to come forward, to pose questions, and to get that audience is really important. And MHRA, in their consultation on fees, they have just launched a direct consultation with MHRA for manufacturers. It's quite expensive, but if you've got an innovative device and you want to be able to talk directly to the regulator and you're thinking of the UK as a market, it could be an investment that will save you money long term.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah. But in terms of that, so the discussion with the FDA, as I said, the pre-submission of the Q-sub, so this is something that is really helpful. It's free of charge in comparison to maybe what the amateur is doing. But at the end, yeah, it's give you the hints of if you are on the right direction. Because, yeah, they are not giving you a strategy like they will give maybe. So, although it's not like, oh, is my classification okay? Is this, you have really to provide a full strategy and they say, yes, I agree with what you are saying, or this is okay, or that maybe this part you have to review, etc., which is also a structured dialogue, if I can say. But this is something that is helpful a lot. Hoping that now Europe is also going on that. In terms of similarities or overlap between EU and US, because you said before that, yes, you can reuse maybe what you have done already in one region to the other. So is there like a 90% overlap or it's like 10% or how?
depends on your device. If you consider the quality management system first, because they're part of the same thing, but let's just separate the quality management system from TD at the moment. Until recently, the FDA was based in the QSR, which was slightly different, slightly less structured than where they're going. And now they're moving towards ISO 13485, which I think is a really positive move, partly because ISO 13485 obviously then leads on to MDSAP, because MDSAP is ISO 13485 with the regulatory requirements of other jurisdictions integrated in. And obviously, MDSAP is a regulatory audit, so that would then prepare you for a regulatory audit from a notified body. And so I quite like the fact that they're now bringing that 13485 in. I think it's a really positive step forward. The only sort of big sort of warning I've put out there is about accredited versus unaccredited 13485. So
Can you just explain the difference of the term accredited and not accredited?
Yeah, absolutely. So any organization can provide you with a 13485 audit and give you a certificate.
Okay.
So I could set up my own company and
so
I could
easy medical device, I can do that. So for example,
yeah,
I can go to people and I can, I just tell them, yes, do an audit with you. And I find, yes, you are compliant to ISO 13485, which we are, if I can say, doing internal audit, for example.
Yeah.
But mainly this is like an internal audit.
Absolutely. And you can provide a certificate for that.
Okay, so I can create my own certificate with ISO. Oh, it's good.
Yeah, it's nice, isn't it? It's one of those certificates that we say in the UK you would put in your downstairs toilet, okay, because it's probably not worth that much. Nobody's actually auditing you.
Okay.
So in order to become an accredited organization, if you want to go to the next step, you'd actually have to apply to your national accreditation body, and you would have to request that they come and audit you, and they audit you against ISO 17021-1 to make sure that you can actually conduct that audit correctly, that you are training your auditors to the minimum criteria so that when they're going out to conduct that, they're qualified, they're competent with those devices. And then we're audited as an accredited organization. We're audited annually, just like we go out and audit people. We don't get away with it. We both audit and we're auditees as well. And every year they come in and they sample some of the files. And so it's giving manufacturers an assurance that actually we do know what we're talking about.
Okay.
Our people are qualified to a minimum requirement. And we also, which I think is really important, our business plan is also audited to make sure that we are sustainable. So we're not going to go bust next year. We're going to be able to continue with the surveillance of your 13485 cycle, so certificate. And as you know, if you're a manufacturer and you've got 13485, you're using that certificate to set up your supply chain. So any changes to the certificate can be quite expensive. If you go to a client, you've got your supply chain set up, and you go to your distributor and you say, actually, I'm changing my 13485, they can say, oh, well, let's renegotiate the contract at the same time. So it can be really disruptive to have those changes. So an accredited 13485 means you know what you're getting.
Yeah.
This is going to be a sustainable partnership that's going to serve your business all the way through. And more importantly, many of those accredited organizations are also recognized for MDSAP. They're also notified bodies, which means that they're preparing you for that journey. And I think one of the most common problems that I've seen is with unaccredited 13485, quite often they miss the part of 13485 that says you have to look at where the manufacturer is placing product on the market and make sure that those regulatory elements are incorporated. And if that's missed because the unaccredited 13485 audit provider doesn't have that knowledge, then you as the manufacturer haven't really got a 13485 certificate that's worth very much.
So just one thing, is this an accredited certificate? Can they use that to register their device in other countries, or this is not approved at all?
Not usually, no. So certainly we've just been doing some work with our team in South Africa, and there it has to be an accredited organization. If we as a notified body, if a manufacturer came to us and they said, we've got 13485, it's unaccredited, we would say we have to redo that.
Yeah.
And I think that's very disappointing for manufacturers, because it might be cheaper to do unaccredited, but actually the value isn't there.
Yeah.
And I think, I know I've said this previously, and people have said, well, there needs to be different price points. If you are a long way from actually placing a product on the market, having an unaccredited 13485 audit would be exactly the same as your the internal audits that you're offering. And that could be a price point that just gets manufacturers going in the right direction before they call in the notified body or the approved body to actually do the 13485.
True. No, it's great. In terms of documentation now for ISO, it's one thing. For a technical file, can we redo? Because before you said that some things are similar. So is there a lot of effort also if I want, for example, to go from a technical file from EUMDR to a 510K? So is it easy?
510K is quite challenging because obviously the whole ethos of 510K is slightly different, but there are common elements with both the US FDA and the EU. So you could, obviously, we've talked about risk analysis. What I've done in the past, and it's certainly been accepted with most of the notified bodies that I've worked in, is to actually have sort of annexes to your technical documentation that link it together. Because, of course, in the US, there's the AMI standards, there's different standards compared to, for example, the EU harmonized standards. I, as a manufacturer, I'm responsible for saying, well, that's the harmonized standard, that's the US standard. How do they align? What are the differences? Have I tested to the differences? Do I need to test to the differences? And make that justification to bring it together. And it's the same, obviously, with the GSPRs, which are required in the EU, that aren't really mentioned in the US FDA because it's a EU requirement. You can flag through and have a directory at the end, a sort of annex, which meets those requirements. But certainly there's a lot of commonality because in the end, you're eliminating risk through design. If you can't eliminate the risk, you're putting in the alarms and then you're actually informing. That pathway, that rhythm is the same in both jurisdictions. It's just, what are the standards that you apply? How do they differ? And you can just make those justifications. So the structure is more or less the same. I know the US FDA does have a sort of list which is slightly different from the EU MDR list. For most devices, I do believe you could have a single technical documentation structure with sort of annexes that bring it together.
I saw that on the IMDRF, one IMDRF guidance that is showing this kind of structure with that can match all the regions. Is it mainly what we talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously IMDRF is doing a lot of work towards harmonization now, which I think is really positive. I know that I think it's this week or next week they're meeting in
Yeah,
Seattle
yeah, I saw that
for
on
another
LinkedIn. Yeah.
conference, which I think is really good. And we're seeing the notified bodies, the regulators, and the manufacturers get in that space and have those conversations. And again, fantastic to see how it's evolved. Um, there is a lot of overlap. Sometimes the EU, particularly with the EU MDR, does mention specific documents, mainly plans and that you have to have, which aren't prescriptively mentioned in the US. So you just need to go back to your regulatory planning and say, actually, what are the similarities, those common specifications, which, as you say, largely mentioned in the IMDRF, highlight them across in colours for the EU and the US FDA, and then actually what are the differences and how will you go about presenting those differences? Now, there might be a classification difference. That means you have to have two separate technical files. There might be an interpretation. So you might find with certain products a range you've got a range of devices in one technical documentation, but only part of that can go onto the EU market because of different restrictions and requirements. You might then say, well, actually, I want to have a different technical documentation. So on a case-by-case basis, there are exceptions, but I would say in most cases, you can actually combine it into one.
I agree. And also the guidance in the US and the guidance in Europe are not the
Yeah.
same also. So it can also make you diverge a bit on what you need to provide here. So to summarize here, if I can say, if you had a strategy now to expand and I want to reduce the budget, reduce the resources, reduce everything. So what will be your strategy then?
So I think it really depends on your device and it depends on where you're geographically located, because obviously if you're placing the product on the market in the US, you need presence in the US
Yeah.
in the same way as you do in the EU. You have to understand the regulatory requirements that are relevant to your device. You have to put in that legwork in the planning. Obviously, you've got the advantage in the US that you can have a pre-submission meeting with the US FDA, but don't overlook the fact that you can also do that if you're a notified body customer. Going back to what we were saying about 13485 being now needed in the US, why not engage with your notified body, get that 13485, become a customer, start that relationship early and benefit from that. I think that's the relationships are so important. And then I think it also depends on how innovative your device is. I don't think we can overlook the fact that the equivalency criteria in the US are different. They're
Yeah.
much
Yes.
softer than
Substantial
Europe.
equivalence.
Yeah,
Substantial.
exactly. So I think if you're going through equivalency, US is great. However, how are you then going to pull that back into the EU? Think very carefully about it.
I had some
So
clients like that. They say, "Oh, but in the US, I am equivalent to this device. So can I use also the same for Europe to say I'm equivalent to this device?" No, it's not working the same at all.
no, it doesn't work the same. So think holistically about where you want to go. Also think about the sort of potential benefits. So for example, if you need additional clinical data to get into one market or the other, is there a grant scheme, innovation scheme in one market that can actually help you get that? And I go back to what I was saying about the UK IDAP scheme. I can see that being a real benefit to manufacturers. Align your product development with the standards. If you're going to use the US standards, how do they filter into the harmonized standards? So again, it's planning, it's planning. I just keep saying plan,
Exactly.
plan, plan. And I think that's really where it sort of sits. I think you also have to not overlook international knowledge, local knowledge in these international markets. If I were going to the US, I mean, I'm not based in the US, as you can probably tell by my accent. I would want somebody who's got a presence there, who understands the US regulations. And as you've said, the classification is dynamic. Those pre-sub meetings, there's a process to get them. And I can spend a lot of time trying to navigate that, or I can get a local person to help me. I would say get the local person to understand those pitfalls and also sort of give you that feedback.
It's
One
like
of
it's
the
like the same as having a lawyer. If you have a lawyer in the UK, maybe it's not the same as having a lawyer in the US that knows exactly the rule and the regulation. So it's not like you'll take your UK lawyer to go to a US court or whatever. So
no, definitely not. And I think it's exactly that. And I think that local knowledge is really, really important. If even, if you're going to a FDA pre-sub meeting, even sort of knowing where to stay and how to access and things like that, there's a lot of information there. So I would definitely engage with local representatives.
no, it's good.
And I think the last thing I would say is think about how you're going to phase your market entry. Which countries are you going to go to first? Which countries are you going to benefit? How will it benefit you? How will it develop your product, develop your technical file, develop your data, being in one country to then leverage that to go into the next, because nothing should be wasted. Always think about how can I repurpose and reposition the data and the experience I've got to grow my business, to develop my products, to introduce new products. And because each jurisdiction, although there's these common specifications, although there's national differences, there's also different culture and different risk appetites. And so being able to really, if I say the word exploit, I say it very, leverage is a politer way than exploit, but to be able to leverage those differences to develop your business, I think is how you succeed and you end up
No, it's
winning.
great. It's great. I hope, yeah, this is really helpful for people now to understand that you can switch, if I can say, from one country to another. You can reuse what you have already done, so no need to reinvent the wheel, but you have to be careful of what are the regulations that are in one country or the other, including UK, Europe, even Switzerland, if you are, but Swiss is really aligned with Europe, so there is not a lot of differences here. But yeah, you have really to get those things, and having local people to help you for that. Yeah, it's mainly something interesting. Okay. As I said, you are from DQS. So now how can you help? I mean, I have a lot of people that says to me, oh, which notified body should I use? I mean, should I recommend? So should I recommend DQS?
So yes, obviously, because I work for DQS, I think the relationship with the notified body is very much dependent on the manufacturer and also the organization. And obviously, when I was in industry, I worked with lots of different notified bodies. Some were right for a particular time. They were right for a particular moment. It's very expensive to change notified bodies because you've got to relabel. So you need to pick your notified body wisely. And so I would obviously put DQS right at the top of the list.
Yeah.
When you're looking at your notified body, do think about MDSAP. Not all notified bodies have MDSAP, so they don't have that international offering. And of course, MDSAP is mandatory in Canada. So if you're going to go to the US, actually Canada's the next logical step. It's opening a much bigger market, but if you don't have access to MDSAP and you've got to go to somebody else to provide that, it's actually duplicating your costs. So again, it comes down to your market strategy. But if you're going to go into North America, think about MDSAP, think about an organization that can provide MDSAP, and then think about what else you might need in that package, because I think by the time you get to MDSAP, most organizations have a portfolio of products that they can offer you, because some supply chains need 9001. Some people are now looking at sustainability standards or environmental standards in order to accept your medical devices into that jurisdiction. Most people who have MDSAP have that whole portfolio. So I would focus, if you're going international, particularly if you're going into North America, on organizations that can provide MDSAP. All of the notified bodies are different.
Yeah.
They've all got their own personalities. Some provide you with lots and lots of information. If that's important to you, that's where to go. Some will do a sort of more cradle to grave with the testing and the certification all under one roof. I always used to question about whether that is really in my company's best interest, or whether I'm better to go and get testing somewhere else and present it to a different certification body. But again, that's a personal choice. And then I think it's a case of, can they deliver to your timelines. And obviously, if you're a business, you need to have that audit and that TD review looked at according to your timeline. And I think if you're quite an established medical device organization, you've already got a relationship with the notified body, you've already got the audit under your belt, you might need a scope extension, that's fine. It's just the TD scheduling. That's quite straightforward. If you're a new organization, particularly if you've got an innovative device where it might be challenging to the notified body, or the notified body might need to consult with the competent authority, then I think it's good to choose someone who can give an agile response to that.
Exactly. And as you said, so each notified body is different. Recently, the EU also made a list of all the pricing for notified body.
Yeah, can I just make a comment?
Impossible to read, to be honest. It's not possible to read. So don't use that as the criteria because it's an hourly rate. It makes no sense. I mean, how can I define how much it will take? So
I think you have to be very careful as well, because what I've noticed is that the pricing structure within different notified bodies is different.
Yeah.
So some will just charge you for the certification fee, which covers all project management, all your calls, everything, and then the hourly rate for the audits. Others will charge you the certification fee as a sort of going towards the notified body, but if you call them, they'll charge you a 15-minute fee.
True.
So it can actually get quite expensive, particularly if you need that extra support. Some will sell you like a package of support, like a package of project management, and you can choose whether you want 5 hours of project management where you can call them and get that support each year, or 1 hour. Others won't, and they'll charge you by the hourly rate. So I think it really depends on you, your state in the, where you are in your regulatory maturity and what you actually want. My experience would be go to multiple, get quotes, compare it. If they can't deliver to your timelines, then you need to find someone else. Don't necessarily think the most expensive is the best.
No.
I don't necessarily think that the cheapest is the best either. It needs to be right for your particular case.
No, I think you're right, and you have to understand also that behind a notified body there are humans. Each human is also different. There are also policies that are different, culture is different, the countries are different. So because you can choose any notified bodies in the European Union, so mainly you can go for.
So there is one thing perhaps that I have seen very commonly overlooked in the EU, is that you get CE certification, but then you have to apply for reimbursement in each member state. It's not automatic that you can just put your product on the market and it's then reimbursed by the health insurance. And when you apply for reimbursement, it's actually measured against the state of the art of that country. So just because you've got CE certification won't necessarily mean that you've got you're going to get reimbursement. Now, there are some countries, and I won't name them because obviously there's impartiality and so forth. There are some countries where their state of the art tends to be quite high. So it's more difficult to get a CE mark, but once you get the CE mark, it's easier to get the reimbursement. And there are other countries that have a different state of the art. It might be more easy to get CE marking, but you're not going to get that reimbursement. And so then you're going to have to transfer to another notified body potentially to get that. So I think that, again, back in that regulatory strategy, don't just choose the cheapest. Yeah,
just really look at the overall structure and get some people to help you, like consultants. Or
it's that local knowledge, because if you're coming in from the US to the EU, you wouldn't have that local knowledge.
And Europe is not only one country, so it's mainly
many.
An issue also. So great, thank you, Claire. It was really helpful. I hope this helps people to understand now how maybe to move to another country and to be optimized, if I can say. I hope for that. Maybe we'll invite you again for UK news when there will be
UK update.
UK
we should hear something in the next few weeks. There should be some announcements from
contact
MHRA,
me and tell me that let's organize another call and another podcast and discuss about that. Okay, Claire, it was really helpful. Thank you very much, and I wish you a nice day.
Thank you. Thanks, then. Bye-bye.